This book, though, I had anxiety reading this at some points. Like my whole stomach was doing like flicky
Oh,
stress balls because it was so damn relatable. And you know, when it like put me back in like college mode, and I
yes.
was like,
Yeah. Some people said they have to read it in bits and put it down. I'm like, oh, I don't.
oh, like my brain was like, this is so relatable. But what we'll do is we'll start off with you introducing yourself and
Yes.
this incredible book here.
Okay, yeah. So I'm Kate Martin, and my debut came out this year, and it's Are You Okay, Elliot Hart?
So I suppose the main question we have to ask is what was the inspiration behind this book? Because it is incredible and highly important to kind of have a book like this in the world. And I know it meant a lot to me when I read it. So I'd love to know what your kind of like inspirations behind it were.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, there was two things really. The Elliot bit was sadly from personal experience. So my mum was poorly from when I was about 14 till about 38. When she sadly died when I was writing the book. But I was filled with anger and hurt and jealousy of people that had healthy parents and could do all the things that I never could do. And I never classed myself as a young carer because I always thought that young carers had to actually like physically look after their parents. But when your mum, because she was physically ill and then mentally ill kind of with it was that constant worry and that constant angst and that constant wanting to fix them and wanting them to be better. So to deal with that, I thought I'll write and write as much as I could. So I created Elliot, who's a young carer to his mum, who's got depression and agoraphobia, and just to highlight really the constant stress and worry that that can give a teenager when they're at school. And then the second inspiration would be Josh. And with Josh, I wanted to highlight bullying, which I can see a bit in my job, and to kind of explore the reasons why people bully. So when you see that really angry teenager, more often than not, there's a reason behind it, and to kind of explore the reasons why people should bully. So it was kind of Elliot with a young carer angle, and then Josh with a bullying angle.
Yeah, I really loved the dual perspective because they balanced each other out so well, and you could see how different situations in different people's lives interweave in a way that you might not always kind of like notice on like the surface. Was it always then the plan to have these two kind of opposing people who had links in some ways? For example, Josh sees Elliot's life as almost
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Um, and it really highlights that the surface level is probably not what is actually happening with people. So was it always kind of going to be explored in that way?
Yeah, Elliot was the first character to be created. So I kind of created Elliot, and then I knew I wanted to look at bullying as well because that's just something that frustrates me in life as well. And it was exactly that. It was to kind of let teenagers see that all the people that they sit with in the classroom, they don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And the only way I could do that was really with a dual narrative. So Josh looks a certain way, but behind the scenes is quite a lot going on. And the way that he deals with it is really angry and really violent and really aggressive and and kind of confrontational. Yet he has quite a lot happening in his home, and then Elliot has got quite a lot happening, but deals with it in a I want to hide away and I want to be in a corner and I don't want any attention. So the only way I could really do that was with the dual narrative because I needed readers to see a different side to Josh. I think with Elliot, you can kind of get Elliot and you can see what he's dealing with, but with Josh, because he's so different at home and at school, the only way I could really do that was to kind of do a dual narrative so we could see what was happening at home with Josh. And yeah, when you teach a class and it's 30 teenagers, they've all got, and adults, never mind a class in this society, everyone's struggling, everyone's got a battle, everybody's trying to get through. So I just wanted to highlight that how people act on the outside isn't always the full story. So Josh does, mean things, and it doesn't excuse it, but a bit of understanding might be a way to helping him.
Definitely. Like, I think on the surface, I should hate Josh, but like when you're reading through his experience, you really start to kind of like understand, and obviously it doesn't excuse behaviors like that, but it makes him, I don't want to say more likable, but I liked Josh, even though obviously Josh needs to work on some things in his life.
No, Josh has been the one that readers have, you've got to be careful with the right words, haven't they? Cared for, liked, rooted for, maybe. Even more so than Elliot. And I think it's because, I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, but his journey through the book, maybe, and maybe the fact that, yeah, it wasn't all his fault. And you just see a lot of it. You see a lot of it with teenagers. You see the angriest teenagers I teach, there's reasons for every single one of them. Every single one, there's reasons. And it does not excuse it. And there's people that have tough home lives and don't deal like Elliot and don't deal with it in such an aggressive way. But you've got to learn so much as a teenager, haven't you? You've got to learn your social skills, you've got to learn how to fit in, you've got to learn how to be liked, you've got to learn who you are. And if you're doing all that with a lot going on at home and a lot of aggression and a lot of violence and a lot of abuse, then you're going to not always be the perfect person. So yes, Josh is awful and in no way excuse it, but I think it helps to highlight the reasons why, and then that's one step in hopefully stopping angry teenagers making bad choices.
Definitely. And I think there's moments in there where Josh comes to some realizations about things that make, it's just that arc, isn't it, that you see
Yeah.
in young adult books and in life, where people do come to realizations. And I loved reading it, and he has a special place regardless of whether he should or not perhaps have as much of my heart as he does. What I really loved about this book is, like, I felt like I was in both the characters' heads throughout. Like, it was, and it felt so relatable to like my teen life, like the thoughts and the inner monologues that happen when you're at school or when you're at college. How did you do it? Like, how did you like manage to get not only into two very different
Mm.
people's heads and like communicate their identities and like inner selves so effectively? Do you think it's partly your work outside of writings helped you do that, or was there particular like activities you did before you wrote the book that you felt like helped you hone in on each of the voices of
Yeah,
the
it's
characters?
just tough for me because a couple of people have asked me this, and I wish I had an answer, and I wish that you know it still baffles me that I can quite easily become a 15-year-old teenage boy. It doesn't make any sense. No, there was no crafting, there was no activities, there was no teaching, there was no. And I think so when I wonder, well, what is it? How did I find it fairly easy? And I think with Elliot, obviously, it was clearly stuff that had been building up in me in some way. So with Elliot, when he gets angry at his mum because he just is angry at the situation and all that, that was definitely coming from me. And I think the bits in school must be from my job. I've been a teacher now for about 18 years, and I've come across every kind of teenager you could possibly. Actually, no, they keep surprising me. You could possibly come across. So there's stuff in the classroom, the nerves when Elliot gets asked to speak in front of the class, and the bit where they get asked to find a partner and the pressure of just finding someone to be with. That comes easily because I don't want ever to put my classes in that situation. So I'm very conscious of not making people feel really anxious in lessons. But with Josh, like I have no idea how I became an angry. I have no idea. Yeah, I was conscious of making them because it was first person as well, so I needed to make them sound different, and I was always paranoid whether I did that well and whether they did sound different. Um, I have honestly, Charlie, I wish I could say I don't know how. I've just written a sequel and that's just finished, and then I'm stopping. But I do feel like they're real people, like they're in my head, and it must just be a construct of every teenager. After it must just be bits of lots of teenagers that I've come across, and all their problems and talents and backgrounds and so on. But it still baffles me that I can write as a 15-year-old boy. I baffles me. I'm a 42-year-old and I'm just like, I've no
Well,
idea.
you do it incredibly.
I don't know. No idea.
Like,
But there we go.
like I think some of my favorite bits were the bits in school because I found them to be some of the most relatable bits. Like you said, the like asking to speak in front of classes and how you kind of like you just sit there and hope that I remember so vividly like things like that happening at my school and hoping amongst hope we ran out of time
Yeah.
during that class that it got to like the end of the class. I'd not given my presentation and maybe there was only two of us who hadn't, so it would just kind of get forgotten about.
Yeah.
And I remember that like anxiety of like having to go to the front, even though like when I was at school it wasn't like I was particularly bullied or the last
Yeah.
person to be picked or anything. I
Yeah.
just couldn't think of anything worse than standing up. Like it could have been a room full of my like closest relations and
Yeah.
I wouldn't have wanted to do it. So like those bits as well, they just
But it is like if we have staff training and we'll have like a staff briefing every Monday, if I know that I have to speak and I'm fairly confident and I can, stand up with 1,000 teenagers and chat, but if I know that I'm going to speak, I get like, and that, with people my age, and I get that anxiety and I get that like, and I think, I'm an adult who's managed to like create a few, mechanisms as I get older, but for teenagers, when you're even more self-conscious, for some people, that is all they'll think about for the whole lesson. And in English, you have to deliver a presentation in front of a group. It's part of the curriculum that you have to deliver. And the anxiety that brings out in some people. And understandably so, but depending on what kind of character you are. But yeah, it was. I think for Elliot, I really wanted to highlight the little things in lesson, maybe in an idea that teachers read it as well to a point, and just kind of that empathy for the pupils that don't find it as easy to put their hand up or come up to the front or find a partner. Even when he's getting on the bus at the beginning of a book and it's like find a partner. And it's like, well, what about those that have no one to find? Like you're just highlighting that. So it's just a bit of empathy both ways.
yeah, like moments like that reminded me of one of my worst experiences at, I think it was junior school. So they had award ceremonies at my junior school, in which they played the anthem Simply the Best, Better Than All the Rest when everybody went up for an award. I never got an award, so I was simply the rest.
Oh, you see, this is it. And everybody remembers it. Like you just
I
remember, oh, it's
still
like
remember it to this day. Like, I still remember that anthem stresses me out because I'm like, well, I'm not the best, I'm the rest.
oh no. That's awful. I've done in the second book, I've done that song. They walk into the hallway and I've done what have you done today to make you feel proud? Because that's always played every time we do anything. But yeah, there is nice things to high school. I feel like I'm really bringing it down here, but
Yeah,
yeah, it
there is.
definitely
But
there
we
is. But
all
it
remember
definitely
the
highlights some of the anxieties that can come from high school as well.
definitely. Obviously, your novel tackles really kind of like difficult and sensitive topics. How important do you think it is for not only young adults to read these, but them to be available. Because I think when I think back to when I was a teen, books like this highlighting topics such as the ones you highlight didn't really exist, and I don't think people really thought that they were needed. I think it was, oh, reading, especially if it's not like a school
Yeah.
book, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Book, it's for enjoyment. They just want like adventure and witches.
Yeah.
But how important do you think it is that books like yours exist?
I was nervous. I wrote a book not really intending to get it published. It was honest therapy to just get me through a tough time, which I think comes out in the book. But from personal experience growing up and from what I see day to day at work, teenagers can have it hard and do have it hard. They really do. I've seen awful stuff. And not only that, but they have all the difficulties of being a teenager as well. So I knew that it wouldn't be a book that would go big. Do you know what I mean? I always called it in my head like a quiet book that would just creep out and find the right people. Because I knew it wasn't like the big fantasies or the big thrillers or anything like that. But I just thought, imagine that one person who, is dealing in their head with a lot more than maybe the person sat next to them. And maybe they find it and they get their hands on it. And then in my tutor group, obviously I can't say too much here, but there's a girl in my tutor group who is an outsider of sorts and is dealing with quite a lot. And I didn't realise, but she went and got my book from the school library. And then she just sent me an email going, your book is beautiful, full stop. And that was it. And I just thought, this is it. This is it for me. If it can just quietly find its way out and find the people that it needs to find, then I've done what I wanted to do. So it does tackle tough things, which is really hard when your year 7 runs into it, who's 11 years old, going, Miss, I've got your book. And you're like, oh, okay. Does your parents know? Because it does quite realistically tackle some tough themes, but you'd be naive to think that teenagers don't tackle tough things. They do. So it just hopefully encourages people to have some empathy and encourages people to be kind and encourages people that if life can be tough, let's just look out for the person who's a bit quiet in class, or the person whose trousers are a bit short, or the person who's really angry, or the person who's a bit pale, or the person who is really quiet, and sat at the back. It hopefully brings that to attention. But I was under no illusions that it wasn't. It's not like the big sellers. Does that make sense, Tally? It's not going. It's it will be in the school libraries hopefully, and the right people will get it.
Like it's definitely one of those books that is gonna touch people, and like when it like the anxiety I had reading this book at times is like I've not read a book that has both simultaneously stressed me out and like made me like think about how like my experiences at school and maybe some of the other kids that were around me at the same time. It was the same feeling I got when I first kind of read a book that had a chronically ill main character, in that it's feeling seen, and everyone needs to be able to feel seen, especially with the topics that you explore in your book, because they can be very isolating situations to be in, that you might think, oh well, none of these, it's just me experiencing this. And there is something to the idea of a problem shared being a problem halved, in that knowing you're not the only person in the entire world going through something.
I can't imagine if I'd read that book as a teenager. I can't imagine what impact it would have had on me if I'd read that, because I just didn't identify myself as a young carer, because it was a different setup. My mum was great and lovely and just had her own bits, and I didn't have to physically care for her. So I just never did. And I imagine if I'd read a book like that and just thought, oh yes, that's, and just acknowledged, you know, it doesn't fix it, does it? People's lives can't be automatically fixed, but it's like you said, it's just that being seen. It's just that to think, oh right, I acknowledge it now. If I was 38 when I acknowledged that it's probably had an impact, that's a long time of just a lot of emotions all twisted and messed up. So yeah, it is, isn't it? It's just, and even with Josh's side, you know, which I've had no experience of, but yeah, just that idea of recognizing yourself and just thinking, right, and if you don't recognize yourself, realize that some people do go through this, so recognize it in others and go that way. So yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely made me think about some of the characters that I knew at school, and what made me think maybe there was more going on than I realized back then. And whilst they were still
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
maybe I should take a second to think what else is
yeah,
kind of going on, because like it's a strange thing to connect it to true crimes, but I I do, in that a lot revolves back to true crimes and this psychology in my brain. And it's that like nobody is inherently born
yes,
as a bad person.
yeah.
Like it's the whole nature versus nurture thing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is definitely. It's that idea. And I think that's why I had to write a book too, because as much as it highlights the difficulties that Josh and Elliot have, it's like, well, what do you do next? Because with a bit like you, I think about the people, the Joshes from when I was at school, and it still annoys me. I still get, do you know what I mean? I'm still like, oh, you made people's lives miserable, but I know why they did, but I still get annoyed by it. It's a really complicated emotions, because if you hurt someone else, then that's that, you know, you're going to have to take that responsibility. But it starts a discussion, it starts important discussions, and that can't be bad.
Definitely not. Um, I'd love to know, because I know you read so many UKYA books, what some of your favourites are that maybe you've read recently, or ones that just really stand out to you.
Oh, the one, and this is an utter coincidence. Recent one is I bet you've got around The Eternal Return of Clara Hart. And it's an utter coincidence that there's two hearts in there. It
Love
just
it.
made me realise. It made me realise that I like gritty YA. That's my bit. That's the bit where I get excited writing gritty stories, and I get excited reading them. So when I read that one, it was back to like teenagers and they true, like obviously it's got the you repeat the same day, which isn't as realistic, but it looked into damaged teenagers and the choices they make and what they do and so on. So I reckon yeah, recently that's been the one that my favorite one.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't put that book down.
I read.
It was another one that was stressful to read, but I absolutely like adored. And I really enjoyed the kind of male perspective on something that's usually looked at from the female perspective in especially YA. I love that book.
Yeah, and it's highlighting the bigger themes, isn't it? I think I like that, the ones that have got, you know, with the masculinity and
Yeah,
so on. It's an important book again. It's a book that I could give to my teenagers and it would make them think twice about what they do. I like ones like that. It's a teacher side in there. Give them an emotional punch at the same time as making them. That's kind of, and then I'm happy.
but I think that's why the big themes that get looked at in YA work so well, because they are emotional. And I always think there's one thing trying to kind of like explain to people, look, some people, but if you add an emotional story and narrative to it that like punches people in the face or makes them feel anxious, or like the emotional element just makes the narrative and the story stick with you more, and
Yeah.
it helps, like when there's that emotional link, you're always going to feel more empathy for the
Yeah, it's
situation.
like the I'm always a character driven kind of writer and reader. Do you know what I mean? It's just who I'm sure it's because of the job, I'm sure it is, but I just yeah, I like books that are character driven. I like a character that's flawed, especially, you know, the teenage ones, and they have to work out their messy choices and their messy lives and so on. So I think that comes with the emotional bit. I just like a character that you can get on board with, which is more memorable in the end.
Yeah, I want a character. I don't want a character that's got it all together, because I don't. I
None of
need
us do.
I need characters that are just as messy as I
Yeah.
am.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Because I think there's a TikTok sound going around at the moment that is basically like to escape my own messy life, I'm gonna read the messy life of somebody else.
It's like you when you said with true crime. It's like when people sit down and put Netflix on and put a really awful true crime on because they've had a bad day at work, and you're like, what? Yeah, it does. It just makes you think, oh, I'm okay. Look at this.
Yeah, could be worse.
Yeah.
Could be in a haunted house with masked murderers chasing, but I'm not. So it's it's all okay. It's fine. I think that's why I think the other love of mine is obviously fantasy, and I think that's why, because it's like, well, at least I'm not getting chased by a dragon that can breathe fire.
See, I'm in awe of fantasy writers. I just in awe of it. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. I just go so like realistic, and I'm like, oh, I need a dragon. I need to bring some other stuff in.
I do. I mean, books with dragons. I've got to love them. I started reading sci-fi now as well, which was something that before
Yeah.
Iron Widow and before Mindwalker, which is
I've seen Mind
hilarious.
Walker everywhere. See, I'm going to ask you now, and you can obviously. What's your favourite one you've read recently? If you had to.
That's the worst question.
It is, isn't it? You don't have to answer. First one that came in your head when I asked the question.
The first one that came in my head isn't out until autumn 2023, so I
Okay,
really
can't do
can't.
that.
Like, it's not even announced, so I can't. I really loved Friends Don't Tell.
Okay. I haven't read.
That was really it's a thriller, but there's a lot
Yeah.
of like real world mental health,
Oh,
etc.
I might go for that. I do like a thriller as well. Any teenage books.
Yeah, it's in the same kind of vein of You Can Trust Me, in that like there's
Yeah.
it's a thriller, but you've got those like important topics going through it as well. Yeah, that was a really good one.
Right, I'll try that one
And
next. I might have a big pile of books to read.
I mean,
I don't know how you do it.